After withdrawing from the NBA draft, Darrion Williams is now the biggest name in the transfer portal and someone the Zags need to pursue.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome in the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, folks, thanks again for joining here on this live edition of the Locked On Zags podcast, recording this thing Tuesday afternoon, 3 p.m. Pacific time. For those of you joining on YouTube, appreciate it. Boogie Fland committed to Florida, which could be good news for Gonzaga. We'll talk about why. We're also going to have a discussion on Ismaila Diani's role next season, what it means for Braden Huff and Graham Ike and Gonzaga's entire front court. A couple other little news and notes to get to at the end of the show as well. But first, we are going to lead off today's show with the big news around the college basketball landscape. Darrion Williams, who played last year at Texas Tech in the Big 12, has withdrawn his name from the NBA draft process. He is in the transfer portal and immediately becomes one of, if not the most sought after player in said transfer portal. Very, very talented guy. We're going to talk about him. We're going to talk about his potential fit in Spokane and how realistic it might be for Gonzaga to pursue him in the transfer portal. Darrion Williams, a 6'6" rising senior forward from Las Vegas, Nevada. He was a 3-star recruit out of Bishop Gorman High School, same high school as Zach Collins. So there is a connection between Gonzaga and Darrion Williams. Admittedly, not a super strong connection, but at least something in the sense that Gonzaga has recruited out of that high school in the past. One of their better players out of that high school in the past. Williams, again, 3-star recruit out of high school, according to 247 Sports. He wasn't on their composite rankings, which means most of the other recruiting services didn't really like him much coming out of high school, and that's why he ended up at Nevada. No disrespect to Nevada. That's a good school, but his other offers were like Long Beach State and Eastern Washington and mostly Big Sky or Big West schools. But he pretty much immediately proved that not only did he belong in the Mountain West at Nevada, but that he belonged in the higher arches of college basketball. He was outstanding as a true freshman for the Wolfpack of Nevada in the 22-23 season, played 33 games, started 30 of them as a true freshman, and played about 30 and a half minutes per game, averaged 7.5 points, 7.5 rebounds, again, as a true freshman, a little under 3 assists, 1.5 steals per game, shot 36% from three, 46% on his 2-pointers, about 80% from the free throw line. Understandably, he was named the Mountain West Conference Rookie of the Year. And also understandably, that was his only season spent at Nevada in the Mountain West. He hit the transfer portal after the 22-23 season and landed in the Big 12 with the Red Raiders of Texas Tech. And as a sophomore, he continued to show why he is such an outstanding player, averaging 11.5 points, 7.5 boards again for Williams, moving from the Mountain West to the Big 12, 2.5 assists, a little over 1 steal per game. He was also an incredible three-point shooter as a sophomore. He's already a great physical rebounder. He's already a very talented scorer getting downhill, good defensive player. But my goodness, as a sophomore, Darrion Williams shot 45.8% from three. That is Nolan Hickman levels of efficiency from beyond the arc, Corey Kispert levels of efficiency. It was on a little under 3 attempts per game, 2.9 attempts per game, which is not a huge volume, but it's also not nothing. It's also not nothing. Like Michael Ajayi shot 47% from three at Pepperdine, but on a pretty small volume of attempts. Anton Watson was like a touch over 40% his senior year, but on a very small volume of attempts. To shoot 45.8% from three on 3 attempts per game in a tough defensive conference as a sophomore is a very promising sign of Darrion Williams' overall shooting ability. He was also 51.5% on twos, 87.5% from the free throw line. He earned all Big 12 third team honors, and he went absolutely nuts at the end of his sophomore season. In the final 10 regular season games, of Williams' sophomore season in 23-24. He averaged 17.2 points, 9.2 rebounds, shot 60% on two-pointers. And in those final 10 games, he took 28 three-point attempts, knocked down 18 of them. That's good for 64% from the three-point line. This included a 30-point, 11 rebound, 12 of 12 shooting game against Kansas. It was a home game for Texas Tech, which is about the only thing that keeps this from being one of the most individually impressive single game performances in the Big 12 that I've ever seen. 12 of 12. He was 4 of 4 on threes, 8 of 8 from twos, and 2 of 2 from the free throw line. What an incredible game against a very, very good Kansas team. Williams ultimately opted to stay at Texas Tech for his junior year, and he fully broke out, if you can call it that. I think he arguably broke out as a freshman. He's been fantastic all 3 years he's played college hoops. But last year for Texas Tech, he averaged 15 points, 5.5 boards. The rebounding dropped a little bit because they brought in JT Toppin, who is an elite rebounder. He also averaged 3.6 assists. That's a career high for him. The three-point shooting dropped a bit as well, 34%. That's a fairly significant drop from the 45% that he was as a sophomore, but his volume increased to 4 attempts per game, and 34% on 4 attempts per game is far from bad. It's just a far cry from the near 46% he shot the previous years. Also 84% from the free throw line. He was all Big 12 first team. He was also named all region in the NCAA tournament because he was phenomenal in the NCAA tournament. This is the big reason that he declared for the NBA draft. If you have a good season, especially in a good conference, you're going to likely consider the NBA draft. If you have a good season and then you punctuate that with a really good performance in the big dance, you'd be silly not to declare for the NBA draft at that point. So for Williams, he has 13-9 against UNC Wilmington, 28, 6 boards, 5 assists, 2 steals, 11 of 18 against Drake in the second round, then 20 points, 9 boards, 3 assists, 3 steals against Arkansas, and then 23 points, 5 boards, and 3 steals on 9 of 18 shooting against Florida in their ultimate loss in the NCAA tournament. All that led, of course, to Williams entering the NBA draft process. And unfortunately for him, he's made the decision to not stay in the draft process. He measured at 6'4.5" without shoes. He's listed at 6'6". So being actually 6'4.5" is not that surprising. For those of you, we talked about this in a Ryan Nembhard episode recently. The measurements at the combine are without shoes on. The measurements that teams take typically and what they list on their site are typically with shoes on, and they usually round up. So shoes at about 1.25 inches. So if he's 6'4.5" with shoes, he's about 6'5.5". Listing him at 6'6" totally makes sense. But yeah, if you're looking to be a wing in the NBA and they find out you're actually 6'4", that's going to hurt your draft stock a little bit. So that combined with some other stuff led to Williams ultimately deciding, hey, I'm probably going to be a mid-second round pick. And in the days where I can make literally millions and millions of dollars playing college basketball, I'm going to choose to do that as opposed to being a mid-second round pick, which I'll probably be again after my senior year. So that's the thought process for Darrion Williams. He leaves. He entered the transfer portal, so Texas Tech replaced him by bringing in Tyree Bryan from Santa Clara, LaJuan Watts from Washington State, and some others as well. So they don't really have a need for him anymore. So now he's kind of out available on the open market. And I'll tell you this, Jeff Goodman from the Field of 68 has made it clear that there are 2 obvious front runners for Darrion Williams at this point. That would be Kansas and NC State. Kansas totally makes sense. Bill Self's team, they lose A.J. Storr, they lose Zeke Mayo, they lose Rylan Griffin. They're 3 kind of primary wings from last year's roster. Now they've brought in a bunch of guys already, including Trey White from Illinois, including Darren Peterson, the second best freshman in the country outside of AJ Dibansa. They got a couple other transfers coming in who are kind of around Williams' size as well. And then for NC State, new coach Will Wade taking over that program from McNeese. Terrence Arsenault, 6'6" wing from Houston. They add him in the transfer portal. 6'6" guard Kadir Copeland. They also got Colt Langdon's a 6'7" big. They got Matt Abel's a 6'5" transfer. So they got some size and kind of positional needs already filled. But Darrion Williams is so good. He'd start for Kansas. He'd start for NC State. There's absolutely no debate about that for him. But it is notable that those 2 teams do seem to have already filled some spots there. And in terms of his fit at Gonzaga, it's pretty obvious. He's really, really good. He's a really good basketball player. He's a great scorer. He's a good 3-point shooter. He's a distributor for his position. He's always averaged like 2+ assists per game. and he's a very good defender. Always averaged over 1 steal per game. He's tough. He's physical. He's hard-nosed. And what it feels like Gonzaga has been really IDing in the transfer portal lately in the pursuit of Desmond Claude, which we'll talk about in a second, the pursuit of Tyon Grant-Foster from Grand Canyon, even some of the other players they've been pursuing. They're looking for like a high-scoring wing, like somebody who can really give you 20 on any given night, who's looking to score when they have the basketball in their hands. I think it's kind of their hope to replace Caliph Battle. I think Adam Miller sort of fits the Nolan Hickman replacement, and finding a Caliph Battle type who can go downhill, get a bucket, you can get him the ball and just say, hey, score, and they're going to go out and get that done. And I think Darrion Williams would absolutely fit that mold. He's going to be really difficult to land. He's going to cost a pretty penny or 2 or 3 or 5, but he fits exactly what Gonzaga has been kind of IDing. He's a bit bigger, like I said, and more of a 3 than a 2, but gosh, Gonzaga would find a way to make it work. I think a starting lineup of Braden Smith, Adam Miller, Darrion Williams, Braden Huff, and Graham Ike would be exceptional. Be exceptional on both ends of the ball. Plus, you'd have Emmanuel Innocente, Jalen Warley, Ismaila Diani coming off the bench, as well as the 2 freshmen, Davis Vogel and Parker Jefferson, as well as Steele Venters, potentially. Mario St-Superi, if he ends up committing as well as a backup point guard. So there's a lot of reasons why Darrion Williams would be such a tremendous get for Gonzaga. Now, there's a lot of reasons he'd be a tremendous get for pretty much every program in college basketball. And with Kansas and NC State having presumably very deep pockets, I'm sure NC State is ponying up the cash for Will Wade in his first year. Kansas has always been a program that's been able to land the highest level of talent. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up at one of those 2 places, but man, if you're looking to dream a little bit, Gonzaga could really use a Darrion Williams, and I'm sure they're at least going to check it out. Whether they feel comfortable or capable of bringing him to Spokane remains to be seen, but this is a very talented player, and it wouldn't be a surprise at all to see the Zags do everything they can to bring him to Spokane. Well, folks, Boogie Fland made it official. He committed to Todd Golden and the Florida Gators, but that might be good news for Mark Few and the Zags. We're going to talk about why coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs, they are in full swing. We are down to 4 teams remaining as we record this right now, and every night has been delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. So whether it's a game-winning shot like Tyrese Halliburton had, whether it's a breakout player, shout out Andrew Nembhard, there has never been a better time than right now to get in on all the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and during the contests. Whether it's their live player props, their performance trends, or same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And if you're looking for some futures odds, the Gonzaga Bulldogs, Mark Few's team, plus 4,000 right now to take home the 2026 National Championship. If you're feeling spicy, want to toss some money down, go ahead and head to FanDuel right now. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. You can head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you will get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from our conversation about Texas Tech transfer Darrion Williams, who removed his name from the NBA draft process and is now among the most sought-after players in the transfer portal, to instead talk about another player who previously removed their name from the NBA draft process, who was briefly one of, if not the most sought-after player in the transfer portal, who has now officially made a commitment to Todd Golden and the Florida Gators. That would be Boogie Fland, a first-year player for Arkansas last year. Boogie got injured, only played 21 games for Coach Calipari and the Hogs, but was outstanding with Arkansas, 13.5 points, 5 assists per game. Averaged a little over 3 rebounds and 1.5 steals. He played most of the early part of the season, got hurt, suffered a hand injury early in conference play, didn't return until the final 3 games of the season in the NCAA tournament. And what really hurt Boogie was the fact that Arkansas got a lot better after he got hurt. I think that hurt him from a perspective of like fans thinking, oh, maybe he wasn't as good as we thought. It definitely hurt him from an NBA draft perspective. Scouts were like, well, this team got better when he wasn't on the floor. I don't think that's necessarily fair to hold that against Boogie. I think the team was was misconstructed and had too many on-ball players and needed to figure out, like, once he was out, John L. Davis and DJ Wagner were able to play more comfortably within the roles that they're used to in Arkansas's offense. And again, that's unfair for that to be held against Boogie. I say all of that because Boogie Fland committed to Florida, a team that already landed Zavion Lee out of the transfer portal. Zavion Lee from Princeton, one of the most sought after pure point guards in the transfer portal. It was like him and Donovan Dent, and now PJ Haggerty from Memphis are kind of some of the biggest ones. But Zavion Lee's a point guard. He's a smaller point guard. He's very similar to Boogie Fland, who's 6'2", who struggled to finish around the rim, who's a great passer and facilitator, but is very clearly a point guard. Todd Golden and the Gators now have 2 pure point guards on this roster. Boogie is now committed to a team where he kind of is going to play a similar role, and it didn't work all that well last year in the sense that his departure is when Arkansas got a little bit better. So there's some intrigue there on more of a national college basketball scale, but in terms of how this applies to Gonzaga, Florida was known to be in pursuit, is still ostensibly, I think, in pursuit of Desmond Claude, who spent 2 years at Xavier and spent this last year at USC under coach Eric Musselman. But I don't see how it works. There's no way that Florida wants 3 of these guys. Desmond Claude was an on-ball player at USC. Now he's 6'5", so he's much bigger than Fland and Lee, but he's a point guard. Like he had the ball in his hands all the time for USC. He was initiating the offense. He was the creator. He was getting things going. Like, there's no room for that at Florida. Florida was choosing between Boogie Fland and Desmond Claude. They chose Boogie Fland. And now Desmond Claude is one of the major programs. I mean, a program that people at the time said, oh, Claude's basically a lock to go to Florida. Like lock it up. Don't even worry about it anymore. He's going to Florida. That didn't happen. And now I think it's almost certainly not going to happen. It would make no sense for either side for Claude to go to Florida at this point. So one of the biggest schools pursuing Desmond Claude is not in the mix anymore. That's good news for Gonzaga. As we reported on Monday's episode of Locked On Zags, for those of you who listened, Desmond Claude also scheduled a visit to Tuscaloosa to visit Nate Oates and the Alabama Crimson Tide, and then that visit got rescheduled or postponed. At this point, indefinitely, it has not been officially put back on the calendar. My understanding is that Alabama was the dead period for recruiting starts on Wednesday, as many of you are listening to this today, and the staff was still out recruiting, and they were out visiting players and coaches, and they basically prioritized staying out for the rest of the dead up until the dead period over going back to Tuscaloosa and hosting Desmond Claude on a visit. Does that mean they're not interested in him? Not necessarily. Does it mean that they're not going to still land him or reschedule this thing as soon as possible and get him on campus? No, but it maybe means that he wasn't the biggest priority, either because they think he's going somewhere else, because they were just prioritizing something else, think there's a better fit for them out there. Who knows what the exact situation is? It was odd timing in the sense that it had only recently been announced that Claude was even visiting at Alabama. And then very suddenly the announcement was like, oh, by the way, it's postponed. So that's a little odd. I think you still have to consider Alabama a player in this mix. I mean, Desmond Claude hasn't even scheduled a visit to Gonzaga. So I think Alabama, at least having scheduled a visit with him, probably puts them in a little bit more of the driver's seat at this point. But it's at least dubious that Alabama didn't bring him onto campus when they had said that they were going to. So that's something to keep an eye on for him as well. We also do know that Ole Miss is in the mix. Chris Beard is a great recruiter. Ole Miss has got some legitimate money in the SEC. I'm sure even more now after such a successful year. I'm sure they're raising the funds to put together as competitive a team as they can. Ole Miss is not typically good at basketball, so when they are, they're going to do everything they can to hold on to it. Washington's reportedly in the mix. At one point, BYU and Kansas were in the mix. I don't think that either of them are super seriously in the mix anymore after making other additions at that position. But I would keep an eye on Ole Miss. I'd keep an eye on Washington. I'd keep an eye on Alabama. I think those are the 3 that really make a lot of sense for Claude at this point. But Gonzaga's right in the mix there too. And I think it'd be silly to rule them out until they've been ruled out, until Claude releases a top 3, or until Claude commits, obviously, or until he says, I'm not visiting there, or, whatever it may be. At this point, Gonzaga still has to be in this conversation. Again, I don't know how seriously they're in the conversation. I don't know who's in the driver's seat of this conversation, because the only team that's ever been reported to be kind of the front runner for Desmond Claude was Florida. And they're not anymore. So it's definitely kind of a wide open recruitment for a really talented player. Claude averaged about 16 points, 4 assists, 3.5 boards per game last year for USC. And we talked about him a couple of times on the show. We did a full segment just dedicated to who he is and what his fit looks like in Spokane. And then we did a show last week comparing Desmond Claude and Gonzaga's other top transfer portal target right now, Tyon Grant Foster from Grand Canyon. We kind of compared the two of them, what Claude's strengths are compared to TGF's, what Claude's weaknesses are, who's the better fit. We ultimately determined that Claude is the better fit because he is more of a on-ball creator point guard type than Tyon Grant Foster. And Mark Few and the Zags love their 2-guard lineups. They love their 2-point guard lineups. The Jalen Suggs, Andrew Nembhard lineup. The Josh Perkins, Nigel Williams-Goss lineup from 2017. Braden Smith's a point guard. So too is Desmond Claude. If those two guys were starting, you'd have your 6-foot pure point guard in Braden Smith, and then your 6'5" off ball, but still more than capable of playing the point guard, 2-guard in Desmond Claude. I think it's a really good fit. I think it would push Adam Miller to the bench where he could be like your lights out 3-point shooter coming off the bench. You worry a little bit about the defense with Claude and Smith, but then you have Jalen Warley playing a big role, Emmanuel Innocente playing a big role. They're both defensive stopper types. Claude's not a great 3-point shooter, but you have Adam Miller, you have Steele Venters if he's healthy, who's a great 3-point shooter. I think that the fit with Desmond Claude in Spokane makes almost too much sense. I've continued to bang the drum for him because I just think it's such an obvious fit for Claude's skill set, for Gonzaga specifically. I really hope they can make this work. I think the fact that Florida is very likely out of the picture is a good sign for Gonzaga. I think the wonkiness of what's happened with Alabama, it may not necessarily be good news for Gonzaga, but it's certainly not bad news that it happened the way that it did. Again, I think you got to keep an eye on Ole Miss and Washington, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's other schools in the mix that either we don't know about or haven't found out about yet. But gosh, Desmond Claude in Spokane would be a dream final edition for Mark Few and the Zags this offseason as they gear up for the 25-26 campaign. Well, folks, we're going to talk about Ismaila Diani coming up next to close out the show, what his role might look like next season, what it means for Graham Ike and Braden Huff. We also got a few other pieces of news in the non-men's basketball space to talk about to close out the show. All of that coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Closing out the show with a mailbag question that was submitted a couple of weeks ago. I apologize, haven't been doing mailbag as much with all the transfer portal craziness, but had this question sitting on the Discord channel. By the way, if you haven't joined the Locked On Zags Discord community, there's a link in the show notes, completely free to join. Folks in there hanging out, talking Zags all the time, making fun of me for being a jinx, for talking about players who end up not committing to Gonzaga. We're having a lot of fun in the Locked On Zags Discord. So join if you haven't yet. That's also a great place to submit your mailbag questions. This one comes from Spicy Lord Wade on Discord, who says, one thing I didn't hear you talk about too much in both Huff and Ike's season in review episodes is how rotations could look next year with Diani. Would love your thoughts because I expect both of them will be asked to step away from the hoop a bit more and play the 4 position when Diani comes in. Yeah, this is a great point and an accurate point, I think, from Wade here, that Diani's, when he's on the floor, he's playing the 5. Like, Braden Huff's going to start at the 4. I think that's the expectation. Graham Ike is going to start at the 5, but both of them are capable of playing the 4. And I think a big part of this conversation is that, yes, while Diani's on the floor, if he's on the floor with Graham, Graham's playing the 4. If he's on the floor with Huff, Huff's playing the 4. All 3 of them not going to play together. That would be an insane lineup for Mark Few and the Zags to run. But whatever big is on the floor with Diani, even if it's Parker Jefferson, they're playing the 4. Diani is a pure 5. That is the role that he is playing. But I also think that when Huff and Ike are on the floor together, which will be the majority of the time, that they're not necessarily each specifically pigeonholed into their own role. I've been, and I kind of said this a little bit in some of those season in review episodes as well, but I think it's important to lay out here. And I'm sure we'll talk about it again as we have months and months worth of episodes before next season begins. But I expect that Graham and Braden will kind of default with Graham playing the 5 and Braden playing the 4, but it will be matchup dependent. And I think what makes this lineup so valuable and what made it work so effectively, specifically against St. Mary's in the WCC championship game, is that Gonzaga could kind of alternate. They didn't necessarily throw both bigs down on the block at the same time because that's not how their offense works, and especially making a change in the middle of the season where you all of a sudden had 2 post players, only 3 on the wing. That wouldn't have gone very well. They're so used to having one of those bigs pop up and be at the top of the key and kind of initiate the offense through there, with whether it's dribble handoffs or high ball screens or just turning and facing and trying to make that entry pass. Gonzaga's offense is predicated on having one of those bigs up at the top of the key and then one big down low who's kind of in isolation trying to get post position. I think Gonzaga will continue to do that, but I don't think it's as cut and dry as, oh, Graham's the 5 and every possession down, Braden's at the 4. If Braden's got a matchup where he can post up and take advantage, you switch it. You bring Graham up to the top of the key, you let Braden go down low. Particularly in the WCC, most teams are not going to have 2 players capable of defending Graham Ike and Braden Huff at the same time. We talked about this on Tuesday's episode of Locked On Zags with Zach Farmer, the host of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast, and a St. Mary's graduate, who mentioned, yeah, they brought in Jazz Gardner from Pacific, I think in part because of St. Mary's or because of Gonzaga's size up front. They need more 7-footers on this roster because they want to be able to counter Gonzaga's size in the front court. So I expect that Graham and Braden will both play the 4 at times next year, when they're on the floor at the same time, and certainly when Ismaila Diani is on the floor at the same time, because Diani is, again, he's a rim runner. He's a great screen setter. He's going to be good at establishing position down low, scoring over his right shoulder with his left hand. I think we haven't seen, the development is happening behind the scenes, but ideally what he's working on is being able to score with both hands, having more of a variety of post moves, working on the screen setting, the footwork down low, establishing his position, but working on skills that are pretty distinct skills for a 5 in Gonzaga's offense, and defensively as well. I think one of the things I like about Diani is he does seem to be a better lateral mover, and he's just so big that he can keep players in front of him and can be switchable defensively. But I think working on his hedging on the screens and working on rotating back and staying in position defensively, all of that I think are big important skills for Diani to work on. Whereas offensively, you don't need to bog him down by trying to teach him how to play the 4 and the 5. He's freaking massive. Let him play the 5. Let him play that position. Let Graham and Braden be the more switchable bigs who can play different positions on this Gonzaga roster, because I think that's how it's set up to be most successful at this point. A couple other things here to talk about quickly. First up, an update on Brenna Maxwell, friend of the podcast, multiple-time guest of Locked On Zags. Brenna Maxwell, who spent 2 years at Gonzaga. She was selected 13th overall by the Chicago Sky in the 2024 WNBA draft and actually hopped on Locked On Zags like 10 minutes after she was drafted, which was incredibly cool of her to do. Unfortunately, she did not stick with the Chicago Sky. She was cut before the season, played professionally overseas. And now an announcement that came out on Tuesday, she has accepted an assistant coach job at Eastern Washington University. She will be back in the Inland Northwest in Cheney, Washington with the Eagles. I don't know if this is the end of her professional career or if she's just doing the coaching during the offseason and going to play professionally when she's not coaching. That's a fairly common thing in women's basketball that you see with players who are coaching and also playing in the offseason. So it's definitely something that could be possible for Maxwell, that she also may just be transitioning into a coaching career and wanting to start that out near Spokane at Eastern Washington. So either way, very excited for Brenna. One of my favorites to watch. She was very, very talented she spent 3 years at Utah. She spent 2 years at Gonzaga. She shot 46% from 3. I think her first year she shot like 49%, was one of the most prolific 3-point shooters in the entire country. So very cool to see her back in the Inland Northwest, even if she's coaching at a different school in that area. And then last but not least, a baseball update for you all. Gonzaga right fielder Mikey Bell was named the WCC Player of the Year. Mikey had a tremendous first season in Spokane with the Zags. He was a transfer from Cuesta Junior College in the Fresno, San Luis Obispo area. For those who are not super familiar with baseball, it's as rare as junior college to high-level D1 program transfers are in college basketball. It's really common in baseball. Junior colleges tend to have really high-level baseball talent. You can go directly to the MLB draft from a junior college, which is part of the reason. So Mikey Bell comes from a JUCO in Fresno, where he was outstanding, one of the best junior college hitters in the country, transfers to Gonzaga, and immediately is the best player on this Gonzaga baseball team, best player in the conference. According to the WCC, he hit .336 this year with a .413 on base percentage, a .575 slugging, led the team with 8 home runs, had 32 RBIs, 3 steals in 39 games played. Huge congratulations to Mikey for being the West Coast Conference Player of the Year as Gonzaga gets set to get underway in the WCC tournament for the baseball season coming up this weekend as well. It's going to wrap it up for me today here in the Locked On Zags podcast. I want to thank all of you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I will be back same time Wednesday for another live show here on the Locked On Zags YouTube channel. It'll be up on the other podcast platforms as well. But if you're here on YouTube right now, before you go, hit that subscribe button, hit that little bell. It'll let you know whenever the shows are live. Very much appreciated. We're trying to get to 3,500 subscribers. We're pretty darn close. I think we can get there within the next month. If you want to help out, would very much appreciate it. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.